Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. It is Thursday, June 18th, 2015. Today on the show, we're talking about MMA in New York, Kimbo versus Shamrock, the state of the UFC heavyweight division, a title fight on UFC Fight Pass, and a whole lot more, so let's get right into it. Joining us on the program today, we've got Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com, the returning Mark LaMonica of Newsday, and of course, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. I'm from there as well. All right, guys, let's get into it. And Mark, I want to go to you first because you have been covering the saga that is MMA in New York for quite some time. You've been doing it as good as anyone, and I commend you on that coverage, by the way. It's Thursday, June 18th. It's around noon Eastern time. Where do we stand right now as far as the fight to get MMA legalized in New York?
Pretty much where we've stood for the last 6-7 years, in the sense that it's not legal yet and there's been no vote. But where we stand right now, from what people have told me, is it's as close as it's ever been, which is what we've heard for years as well. But we are, so the legislature in New York was set to go home in closed session on Wednesday, yesterday. So they've extended it today. There's a chance they'll extend it tomorrow. The MMA bill, as of a few minutes ago, was not on the current calendar for the Assembly to vote on, which means it's still being lobbied and discussed by the members of the Democratic Conference. The conference, Democrats, the way they work is they need a majority of the majority that they call. So they have 103 seats in the Assembly. You have full control over it. You need 76 votes to pass. Typically, what the Dems do in conference is they won't take a bill out of conference to get through the committees if they don't already have their own 76 votes to pass it. This way, if all Republicans call in sick that day, they know they can still pass it. Now, from what I've gathered and seen and talked to people about, this is not a political issue. It's not partisan, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat. It's more generational, really, the issue, from what I've seen so far. So it's not like you need all the Dems to do it because the Republicans aren't going to vote for it. That's not the case. I mean, you have 74 sponsors on the bill itself. 56, I believe, is the latest number that are Dems, 18 Republicans. So there's total, you have the bipartisan support for it. All you need is to get to 76 in the Democratic Conference to say, I'm on board with it. And now I've seen a couple places reported that they have that number. I don't know what's true and what's not. I mean, because a lot of it could just be political talk and strategy and that kind of stuff. So I'm not clear if they're at that. The number I've seen reported is 78. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I don't have that information just yet. But if that's the case, you have a chance between now and presumably Friday. Presumably they're going to extend the session again to get it through. You have to go through 4 committees. It's maybe 2, but it could be 4. It's got to go through the Tourism Committee, Rules Committee, Ways and Means, and then I think a Codes Committee maybe. I could be confusing that with the Senate. There's so many committees and so many people, I get confused.
But it is important to note that it has passed through the Senate once again. There was a kind of new and improved bill that recently passed this week through the Senate. So I believe that's 7 times now that it has passed through the Senate. People get confused about this, and I can understand why. If you don't live in New York, if you don't follow politics, we see, oh, in New York, a Senate, votes in favor of MMA bill, and I get texts all the time like, wow, isn't this great? It doesn't mean that it's legal here. It has to kind of go through these 2 channels. It's gone through the Senate. Now we have to wait to see if it even gets put for a vote. That's the main problem, right?
Correct.
They might have the support, but it needs to be brought up for a vote. So let me ask you this, Chuck. We're all Northeast guys, right? So this is something that interests us. And I think we've reached a point where, this is a major story. This is something we've been following and talking about for quite some time. But you get the impression from the rest of the MMA community, which is a world, it's not like we cover the Yankees and everything is very, regional. We cover a sport that is very global, and we're not so much beat writers per se. We're almost these like global beat writers, if you get what I'm trying to say. That people don't really care about this, A, and B, that the UFC doesn't really need this.
I get the sense that people who can maintain like a big picture of the sport would think, if you live in Colorado like I grew up, or you live in California, I've lived there before, those people probably don't care in terms of New York like we would, because we're going to go to the event, we're going to be able to partake in that. We know a lot of the New York fighters, et cetera, et cetera. The people out there don't really care about that, but what they might care about is just that the sport kind of get out of this archaic notion and just having one progressive state like this that's out there, like in New York, where it's just sort of ridiculous. Casual fan has no idea what the culinary union, and they have no idea what any of this means. But there's one state that sort of represents like, oh, it's too barbaric or it's too whatever to actually get through New York. That's where it changes. That's where you want it. You want it to be flush. You want it everywhere. You feel like you can go anywhere in the United States just because it's a sport that you follow. You want it to be on the up and up. But ultimately, I think this is more of a regional thing, and it's also a UFC thing. They want to get there. It's they want to put on these shows. They're promising 4 shows in New York State, not just in Madison Square Garden. And you have a lot of the fighters who want to represent New York and show up at MSG and fight that. So I feel like it's just a big deal. It's a big event that they want to put together, which for us we like. You know me, I like events. So I feel like I want to be able to see that. But when you talk about as a whole, here we are 6 years later. I remember doing a piece in 2011 for ESPN, a big piece detailing where we're at because we keep using these buzzwords. It's close. And I just don't know, how close that is. We get it lost in this morass of the political, as it goes through this political process. But it's an interesting thing for us to discuss. But I think for a large portion of people out there, they just assume not to even think about it until there's something definitive one way or another.
But beyond, I mean, I agree with you that the whole idea of the sport becoming legitimized gets a big boost by having every state in the country on board. That's a big deal. But beyond that, there's something about New York and the history of combat sports here. I mean, think about this. I mean, my grandfather, I remember growing up, my grandfather telling me about going to Yankee Stadium and seeing some of these old fights. And of course, Madison Square Garden, the site of some great fights as well. And of course, the greatest combat sport fight of all happened at Shea Stadium, as you of course know, the Andre the Giant against Chuck the Bale Bleeder Wepner. So combat sports
that was before MMA was a thing. That was real MMA, right?
Yeah, of course, sure. Of course. So there's a great history of combat sports. In this state. So I think that's another
MSG
layer.
Was essentially built to house combat sports. It's like and you look at everything being piecemeal. We've been through this a million times, but every aspect of MMA is legal piecemeal if it's just on its own. And so to put them into a medley, then it becomes a problem. It just none of it adds up. We all know that, but it's just a matter of New York actually righting its way overdue wrong.
Mark, I spoke to a source very much in the know who's been following this for a long time on Saturday in Mexico, and I said, okay, where are we at percentage-wise? And they told me 20%. On Monday, they changed it to 40%. Just a couple of minutes ago, before we went live, they changed it to 67%. That's the number I got. So we're getting there, although time might run out. That might be their biggest opponent. Where do you have it right now? How confident are you?
I'm 50-50 on everything.
Still?
Just in general. Just as a general principle of 50-50. I mean, it's either this or it's that, right? I mean, if they're saying 67, I've had people say to me that they're 80% excited. I mean, I think the uptick in those numbers came on Monday, when Assemblyman Morelli, who's been the champion of the bill, introduced the amended legislation, which talked about adding an insurance fund for fighters and increasing general combat sports insurance coverage, which was a real big hurdle, a lot bigger than a lot of people thought about, especially in today's sports climate where concussions are the biggest thing in the world. So that was a real sticking point, and that what has converted a lot of people and helped get them their additional support. I think that's where you see the uptick now, and again, we're closer and closer and closer and to a deadline.
Exactly, that's the
deadline is kind of
closer
floating.
To having this discussion again in 2016.
Yeah. I hope this time next week when we're doing this show, we are. I don't want to talk about dream cards for the first show. I don't want to jinx us, but I will say this, and this has nothing to do with the fact that I live in New York State or that to me, Madison Square Garden, while the Knicks have been a pathetic franchise for the last 15 years, I do think it is the world's most famous arena, even though they gave themselves that title. I think this is an important thing for the UFC. And by the way, I heard some people complain, that there's something in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, in this legislation that states that it doesn't state that the first show has to be a UFC show, but given the timing of when the first show can happen and given everything that needs to fall into place, the first show would be a UFC show if it is in fact December 5th. I have no problem with that. I think considering all the amount of money that Zuffa has paid to lobby for this, they should get first dibs. They should have that honor. Do you agree?
Well, they'll have the first show at the Garden. There's no doubt about that.
I think they should have the first show, period.
I mean, I don't know. Somebody might come in and say, we're going to do a card on the 4th. And
how World Series of Fighting.
The Athletic Commission
I mean,
should
Moose
honor
and MMA beat UFC into Massachusetts I think, or was it Connecticut? I think they beat him by a couple of days. But at the same time, I mean, what does that matter? I mean, the biggest show, the biggest promotion, and the biggest market in the world.
They should have the honor of being first. Now, you could say the reason that they've been out for this long is because of their issue with the culinary union in Nevada. So maybe they're hurting themselves. But I think after all the money they poured in, they should have it. And my final point on this is, I think this is very important for the UFC. I think that they need to be able to go to MSG, and then if they want, Barclays Center, and then maybe a John Jones fight at the Carrier Dome in Syracuse. Being in New York, as important as this state is, as important as this city is, this is a black eye on the organization, because it really has nothing to do with the sport, and that's what makes it even weirder and dirtier that they have to explain this to people. They're not they're not going to suffer. They're not going to lose money at the end of the day because they're not New York, but they need this. They need this for their own legitimacy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you that, I mean, on the other hand, the devil's advocate in me says, the last time there was a fight card in New Jersey, I actually, at Newark, I took the train in. So the morning after the fights, I left on Penn Station in Newark, and 8 minutes later, I was in Penn Station, right below Madison Square Garden. So in reality, within 8 minutes of the Garden, you can take a train and be in a really beautiful new arena over there in Newark. So logistically, it's very easy to stay in New York and enjoy all the amenities of New York, then just go across the river to Jersey to see the fights. And as a Jersey guy, I sort of like that in a way. But look, New York is the Mecca, and it's not just New York City. It's all the upstate New York. That's that you can bring that in. You go to Buffalo, you draw in the Canadians. You go all around the state, and of course the two arenas in New York. You can have cards in both of them. So yeah, I mean, it just
symbolic.
The sport should not be illegal any place in the country. That's really the bottom line.
Okay, let's move along again. As I said, hopefully this time next week we are celebrating this great news and talking about the first card, December 5th, which we presume will be headlined, if it does happen, by Chris Weidman versus Luke Rockhold. For now, let's focus on what we know is happening, or at least we think is going to happen. Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock is a mere, what, 30 hours away from this point? Sure. This is big stuff, my friends.
Doesn't get any bigger.
October 4th, 2008. You know that story very well. Elite XC Heat in Sunrise, Florida. They were supposed to fight, and then news breaks on some website called MMArated.com.
Whose scoop was that?
I don't
Weren't you
remember.
involved in that
I don't remember the time. It gets all murky. Jimmy Lennon comes on CBS and announces that this fight isn't happening. This much anticipated fight. It's going to be Seth Petrozelli versus Kimbo Slice. We know what happens. Now Bellator is trying to give it a go one more time, rewrite history, if you will, and they're going to put on this fight tomorrow night in St. Louis. What's your interest level? I don't want to say, I don't want you to compare it to 2008 because Kimbo was a much different guy back then. He was undefeated, hadn't been through the Ultimate Fighter. Ken, obviously much younger. But going into this fight, what's your interest level in it?
If I put my blinders on, and you just think like, we are where we were back then. So 7 years ago, we are where it's pretty good because you're like, that was unresolved. It was sort of epically unresolved, right? Like it went this one way. All the myth of Kimbo went out the door that night. Shamrock became kind of the butt of jokes and stuff like that. If they had still gotten together and fought, there might have been a lot of interest there. But I like that we're just sort of dismissing that. The time period between 2010 and 2015 where the guys haven't competed, we've sort of just said, just get rid of that and focus on this other thing, like where these guys are still, they're still Shamrock and Kimbo. So there's a little bit of a train wreck vibe to it that I like, and it's like and it's funny. I wrote a column, I think it'll come out tomorrow, that basically is Scott Coker's forcing us to sort of really be introspective as to why we want to watch fights. Like a lot of times I think we throw the sporting aspect out there a lot. We talk about the merits, we talk about rankings, we talk about what makes sense, we talk about discipline, all that. This is one of those that has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It's just basically a carnival attraction between two guys who have names, differing levels, like very different levels of names, but coming together, they had the backstory. And it could be epically bad, and it could be really bad, but it's also has its intrigue. So, I'm going to be watching it, just like I think a lot of people probably will do very good numbers. I mean, just the fact that it's Kimbo Slice who, was going, on CBS attraction, and it's Ken Shamrock who's been back. I don't know if you guys saw the Bellator lead-up thing. It was very cool.
Finally, I think it's called,
Very, very cool. He's living in his RV and all this stuff, and they've done a good job to sort of build it up. They've sort of put, like I said, they put the blinders on, and pretty soon here we are. So in my mind, I'm looking at it from a spectacle standpoint only. Like, so you realize again that these fights can't exist, they can't excite you, and that's where I'm at. So I'm interested in watching it.
What do you make of it? You're not as into it.
I've been thinking about this fight, and as each day goes by this week, and you get more into your work week, and as by the time you get to Friday, you like, I need something to escape. I need a bit of an entertainment value there, and I think that's where I'm at for it. Am I going to watch it? Probably. Am I going to watch it live? Am I going to alter my schedule for Friday night to watch it live? No, but I think that's more of a functionality of me, and the fact I can just DVR it from my phone and be good to go.
You're not going no extra mile anyway.
Exactly.
I mean, like, I know what I'm going to get. It's like the difference between, I'm going to admit this publicly here, I like to watch Grease 2 more than I like to watch Grease when it comes on television.
What?
Yeah,
I fully understand.
I agree with them on that. Grease 2 was better.
I fully understand what I'm saying and for the world to consume. And and I get it. Grease is a far better movie. And this is, to me, it's like kind of the same thing here. It's like, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I know this fight's going to be bad. Combined age, 92 years old.
Wow.
Combined time off, 10 years.
At least, and it's just like, I know I'm going to sit there and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm watching this. And then I'm going to watch it, and something will happen that I'll be like, okay, I don't feel like I've wasted my entire time with this. It has the exact train wreck quality that you're looking for on a Friday night.
I wish I could generate Mark's enthusiasm for this fight, but I'm actually feeling less enthusiastic than you are.
Wow.
Which is, if I was sitting at your house and you said, guess what? I was, before you arrived, I was watching NASCAR and there was this like horrific crash, and I just happened to be taping the thing. You want to watch it? I'd be like, yeah, sure. I'll watch on the DVR. I'll watch these cars collide, and I would sort of hate myself for it because. That's not the spirit of the sport. The sport is to win the race, not to see the cars collide. But there's a part of me that would just watch the train wreck, as you referred to. But I'm just not this. I just can't really muster any enthusiasm for this. Back when they were originally scheduled to fight, back then Ken Shamrock was on a long losing streak. Now he's not on a losing streak because he hasn't fought in 5 years. So he stopped his losing streak in 2010. Good for him, but he hasn't fought since then. I just feel like I just can't muster any value in this fight.
Are you boycotting it?
No, I don't feel energetic enough to boycott it. I mean, if it was a pay-per-view,
right,
I wouldn't buy it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's on TV. I will have the DVR on and I'll check it out. But I'm not really. I don't see where the enthusiasm for this is. I don't see where the test of who's being tested
this
and
is for
how.
the right to fight Tito Ortiz, man. He's standing in the wings.
I think Tito is way past these guys, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a title shot next.
I would be more interested in seeing Shamrock fight Royce Gracie again and see those guys grapple. I just don't see this.
I think that's how this all started. I think Shamrock expressed interest in Royce Gracie. Royce has retired. Okay,
at least they found him a guy who's fights just like Royce Gracie and Kimbo.
Yeah,
that's good.
But you mentioned something that I want to touch on. You mentioned Ken living in this RV, no running water outside the gym. He's got his Bible, he's got his gun, and his dog there. That's pretty much it. It's unbelievable. Is it possible that Ken Shamrock is the more intriguing character going into this fight than Kimbo? I feel like the Kimbo phenomenon after The Ultimate Fighter, after a brief run in the UFC, after a brief run in boxing, I mean, we've seen it. We've done it. The allure is no longer there. Is it possible, if we're trying to look at this in the most positive way possible, is it possible that Ken is the more intriguing figure of the two? Because I kind of feel like he is.
Yeah. He definitely is going into this one. I mean, the other one, he was more of a beatable name that was brought in for Kimbo Slice to perpetuate Kimbo Slice into more superstar and give him more time to develop and kind of keep him relevant so they could do another big fight. It was like he was just a guy that was a can. Well, I mean, as much as you get close to, he's going to be a 40 at the time. What was he, 40, 44 or something like that? They're bringing him in to basically just get run over by punches. From Kimbo Slice, give him a nice showcase. This time he's 51. So anytime a guy breaks that barrier of 50, you're like, whoa, this is kind of strange. And he hasn't fought. And you see that, you see what he's been doing. There's been a couple of pieces that came out recently about him living in in the RV and then the Bellator thing. there's some sincerity there. Like, I feel like you're kind of catching up with, he's kind of getting away from his family. It means something to him. Whereas the other side of it, it seems a little more mercenary. You know, it's like he's, you know, I think Kimbo's been more about, like, yeah, you know, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. You know, that sort of thing, like he was saying. It's complete opposite. I think that the rooting interest back 7 years ago would have been for Kimbo Slice to kind of continue it, because you wanted to see this phenomena of him kind of grow. People were talking about him with Mike Tyson back in the day. Sure. And now it's more about, like, wow, Shamrock, you know, the legend, let's see him go out on top and stuff like that. So I feel like it has flip-flopped. It's more about Shamrock.
Mark, do you have a problem with Bellator making this fight? Like, I think it's actually today. Let's point out that it might be today or yesterday, the 1-year anniversary of Scott Coker joining Bellator. This fight doesn't happen in the Bjorn Rebney era with tournaments and all that. Do you have a problem a year later with this being where Bellator is at?
I mean, if it's working, you know, if it works for them and their business model, great. Does it help the sport? I don't understand why this fight needed to be made at all. I mean, yeah, great promotion, unfinished business, finally, and all the hype and this, I'm gonna get him, and okay, great. Like, to me, and it feels far more fake than any other pre-fight, I hate you, you hate me, I'm gonna knock you out, no, I'm gonna knock you out stuff. It's just like, why do I need this? Like, what is this doing for, like, where does the winner go in this fight? Now, I'm all for attraction fights, and that's fine, but these are two guys who essentially have come from nowhere recently, you know, in recent years. There's no backstory. There's no, like, oh, he's won his last 2 fights, or it's like, all right, here's these 2 guys. We found them at the bar, and we're going to put them on the thing, and we're going to see what happens. And it's like, I mean, look, you got a title fight. Bellator has a title fight on that same card.
This is
not
what
headlining.
I meant, though. Like, this is what I meant.
But that's okay, though. I mean, that part of it, I mean, I don't have an issue with it, because if you can draw more eyes to Patricio.
It's entertainment, too, and it's like, it's a funny thing. It's because this is what I mean. Relevance. Sometimes we get so caught up in the sporting aspect of this of the fight game that we do this. We sort of assign value to things of what makes sense. But then something like this has nothing to do with that comes along. It really forces you to reevaluate. Like, why would I want to watch this? And you have to sort of, like, realize that sometimes you just want to see a strange kind of thing, and that's what Coker has. That's what he's been explaining. I mean, I would say that I'm more intrigued by this fight than I was, you know, Bonner, as the Bonner fight that just happened. Yeah, I mean, it just because it has it's like to the umpteenth degree of Carnival vibe, whereas the other one was still slightly viable guys who not that long after their careers, you know. This one's like, it doesn't want to play by the rules. It's just going to exist on its own. To me, it's almost that anti-narrative is almost like Luke Thomas was saying is really the narrative. You know what I mean? It becomes like this, oh, well, why not?
Yeah, well, it brings some more attention to the guys below it on the card. So we've Patricio Pitbull's fighting. We got Michael Chandler's fighting. Who the other one? Strauss is fighting. So you've got and Lashley. So you've got these guys who would be getting some kind of an audience already, but now they're going to get a bigger audience because more people will tune in for this. But and when you ask about the interest in the people, I mean, Shamrock is a legend. He's a legend of the sport. Does he need this? Unless he needs the money. But I had a chance to talk to him months ago when he came out to a Bellator card, and he really believes, at least the way, you know, at least he portrays this belief that he just wants to compete. He's like, well, I said, you're 51 years old. He said, well, you know, guys my age go out golfing. Well, golf balls don't hit you back, you know. And so there's a whole, I mean, there's a whole belief that he's just doing this because this is a natural part of what he does and what he wants to do. And I respect that in him, but I just don't necessarily want to see it.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up those other fighters on the card. I think that's what bothers me the most about this fight. I don't think they did a good enough job of building a great undercard. You know, there are some interesting names, but like the title fight doesn't do much for me. Yeah. It's not a fight that is
it's
really
the opponents
very.
They didn't do much in terms of the matchup.
It's Chandler, and I know there's a lot of buzz about Corrales, but you know, Bobby Lashley. I mean, he's kind of in that. You know, I don't think a lot of people think he's a big prospect at heavyweight. You know, where was Liam McGeary? You know, where was Michael Venom Page? Where were those young stars that really Bellator needs you to know about? And, you know, where's Will Brooks? You know, where are these guys? I don't think that they put together the best card possible that excuses this fight, and that's what bothers me about it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can see that. But I also
Bonner Ortiz had a much better undercard with more. You know, it had Manhoef Schilling, it had Will Brooks. I mean, these are.
Put, even I know it was sort of, you would have been condensing, but Phil Davis, if he was the next guy on the co-main, that would have been major intrigue because here's a guy who was viable in the UFC now fighting there.
Right.
They could have done a lot of. I think it's just the opponents of the names. It just, for whatever reason, they just don't look like the most interesting matchups.
I mean, it looks like a showcase. It looks like we're showcasing this guy, showcasing that guy, showcasing that guy. Now,
and by the way, that worked for Strikeforce, right? Those mismatches always work.
But we don't know. But we don't know that they're all we know is that one guy has a more recognizable name, and the other guy is fighting uphill. But we've seen this in Bellator, we've seen it in UFC, that sometimes the guy you're not expecting comes along and has a great performance. So. I get what you're saying, but I think they're also wanting, they've got a roster where they've got to fill some other cards, maybe they just don't want to. They're going to use this one as we're going to sell this with Kimbo and Shamrock, and we'll showcase some other guys, and then when we can get our best matchups, we'll put them on another card. Maybe that's their thinking.
They're going to do a good rating too.
Yeah, and that's a great point. The best news for Bellator is that they're not going up against Game 7 of the NBA Finals, because that would have been a disaster. Scott Coker, a lifelong Warriors fan, probably very happy they won.
It's like the best case scenario for that guy. He wins the championship.
No way Kimbo could guard Curry.
No way. So that's the state of the Bellator heavyweight division. Let's look over to the UFC's heavyweight division, which I think is...
too?
Yeah. Some big news happened. On Saturday in Mexico City. So, of course, we've talked about Verdum. We know he's the new champion. We've talked about Kane, the elevation. I don't necessarily want to go into that right here. To me, the most interesting thing is, where do they go from here? Because not that long ago, the heavyweight division seemed rather dormant. I mean, it seemed really uninteresting. Now, all of a sudden, in my opinion, it's more interesting than the light heavyweight division. I mean, the possibilities are endless. It really has opened things up for them, Verdum winning the belt. So where do you think they go from here? There's a lot of talk about who should be next for Verdum, and I think most of the talk doesn't surround around Kane, despite the fact that he's been champion. I mean, a lot of people thinking that he needs to at least win another fight before getting back in there. What would you do if you're Joe Silva?
Well, what I would do is I think that this big win for Verdum was a big win for JDS. I think Junior Dos Santos went from a nowhere man suddenly to, now here I am. I'm right here, and I'm the top guy in the weight class, other than the champion and the guy that just got defeated for the belt. I don't know that's where they're going to go. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about Arlovsky. It makes sense, a good storyline. But you know what? Talk about the storyline of if you put Junior Dos Santos against Fabricio Verdum, and get that fight in Brazil. Brazilian versus Brazilian for the heavyweight championship of the UFC. I know that their fight cards are mostly already assigned, but I don't know.
Well, you can't dismiss these little pieces of facts.
Well,
you can say, I know
a rematch there, though. That's the one.
Right, but okay, so maybe it doesn't end up happening there. But I just think that there's.
Let's deal with reality here.
Since when are we doing that? Come on. We don't do that here. I mean, I just think
vote for JDS.
I may vote for him because I think he's the best heavyweight out there who's not wearing a belt and didn't just get defeated for a belt. I think he's the number 3 guy behind the two.
On a one-fight winning streak, by the way. You're okay with that? And I know we talked about Gustafsson getting a title shot off.
He's lost his 2 losses besides one way early in his career. Cain Velasquez. There's nobody else who has a resume like that.
What do you do?
I mean, Dos Santos is the next, in theory, is the next guy in line. But to me, I think the Arlovsky fight is the far more marketable one. You don't have to necessarily, you can pit it against, country versus country. You don't have to necessarily narrow it to just Brazil. He is on the 3-fight win streak, Arlovsky now. I mean,
that's just in the UFC, 5-fight overall.
Yeah, and the fight against Travis Brown was one of the best fights I think I've ever seen, especially in a heavy, just crazy knockdown, like movie boxing fight kind of a thing. To me, I'd rather see Arlovsky fight just because it's such a great storyline. And I know that maybe that contradicts what I said before about the Kimbo Shamrock, but it's legit in my opinion. He's won 5 in a row. He's beaten. He beat Travis Brown. I forgot who he beat before that.
Bigfoot Silva. Brendan Schaub was a little.
Yeah, he still won.
He
was still what, 33 years old at the time. Everyone figured he was done. He still beat the guy. And to me, that's just a great storyline. I feel like we've all seen Dos Santos in title fights before. And thankfully, I shouldn't say thankfully, but thank God we don't have Kane versus Dos Santos 4 right now.
Right.
Because I don't think anybody wants that right now. maybe down the road, we'll see. But I would go Arlovsky. I think that's just such a great story to tell.
What do you think? I think that when you get to Andre Arlovsky, regardless, I know he's looked sort of hit or miss, honestly, with the Brendan Schaub. He looked, he had big moments, obviously, against Travis Brown. It was a crazy fight. You're rolling hot dice with that guy right now. He's basically, I feel like he's just on a hot roll. So you're sort of like, if you could risk putting him in this against somebody else again and losing that fight, or you could do it now. I feel like that fight makes sense. You put Arlovsky against Verdum just because you can right now, and because I think that Cain Velasquez, the beatdown that he took in this last fight, it doesn't warrant it. It doesn't warrant an automatic rematch. He had been out forever. It wasn't like he had like a 6-fight winning streak or 6 title defenses before that. So I would go Arlovsky. Just based on that, I would say, because I feel like a former champion going against a guy who, it could be a high-profile fight for Verdum as well. I feel like that he's been so sneaky. He's been so sneaky great that he's just not to the star level that you want him to. Well, this might actually get him there a little bit more. I agree that the JDS, because of the big rematch, going back to the whole UFC 90 with the knockout of Verdum, his last time he really was cleanly beat. But that could wait a little bit, because you still have Overeem. You have this Overeem fight that people want to see. So it's like you could put JDS with Overeem, and maybe Miocic, if you don't want to kill off all the contenders at once, but you could do Miocic against Cain Velasquez, which would also help Miocic kind of, if he's able to get by Cain Velasquez, that's a huge stepping stone for him, and would give him something more of a spotlight as well. Because a couple of these guys, even though they warrant it, maybe in their resumes, maybe their personalities, there's always something that's not even out. But right now, I think Arlovsky should be the forerunner to get the shot.
From what I understand, sorry to say, JDS isn't even in the discussion. And that doesn't surprise me, because he's still rehabbing an injury. He said he'll only be ready to come back in December. Do you want to keep Verdum, the new champion, on the sidelines until December? I really think it's a 2-horse race between Miocic and Arlovsky. And if I had to bet on one, I would put it on Arlovsky, because I think he's the bigger draw. As you said, he's got the better story. He's a former champion from another era where a lot of fans may have tuned out since then, but you can get them back, perhaps. I do think one thing is important to note. Stipe Miocic is not a very vocal guy. He's not great with the media. He'll admit this. Yeah, he is great on Twitter. He's prolific on Twitter. He's really gone out of his way to try to get this fight. And he's on a 1-fight winning streak, controversial to a degree, lost to JDS. Arlovsky, I want him to get the fight. I think the fight makes most sense business-wise, popularity-wise, all that. But he's so indifferent to it in the media that I feel like you have to penalize him a point for that. Like, Miocic is really going out of his way. Now, what's happening behind the scenes, we don't know. I know Miocic's team is really fighting for it. What's Arlovsky doing? And should that come into play here? Like, should campaigning come into play, or should it be on merit and business alone?
Merit is how I make my decisions, but I don't think that you asked me if I was Joe Silva, and I think that it's hard to. Those guys have a whole different. They've got to think about how many pay-per-views they can sell and all that stuff. So they do think of things a little differently certainly than I do. And I understand that. I think that you do want a guy who's gonna sell the fight. I think that going on that though, I still would of those two guys, I still would go with Arlovsky. Miocic, in my mind, elevated himself in his loss to Dos Santos. I thought Dos Santos was gonna smash him, and it was a really great fight. I thought he could have won that fight. So in my mind, he elevated himself, but I still don't think that I would put him in a title fight before I put Junior Dos Santos. I'm willing to withdraw Dos Santos if I have to, but in exchange, I need to get JDS versus Overeem.
Yeah.
I need that fight to happen.
That should happen.
If that doesn't happen, then I'm going to be very, very upset.
I will say this. I like the fact that we're sitting here talking about the heavyweight division again, because it seemed like it went through we were looking at JDS or Velasquez and then distant everybody else. Now the field there's like 7, and we're not even talking about Ben Rothwell, who's sort of like resurgent in that division. You have a lot of possibilities, and whatever they do, I think it's suddenly going to be very exciting for the next year as these things kind of play out, which it's a glamour division. It says Brock Lesnar, left, and it sort of has suffered a little bit. Overeem, they tried to kind of to groom him to get the title shot, and he kept dropping it right at the altar. He never could get to the title shot. Well, now he's back in the mix, and whoever wins, I just feel like we're back in the Strikeforce Grand Prix, but it's with everybody now. It's like the big, it's like everybody's involved in it again. So it's a lot of fun.
And I know we're not here to analyze that fight from Saturday night, but let's lay out some praise for Fabricio Verdum. I thought I didn't think he had a shot at that fight. I thought that Cain was going to go out there and smash him, and man, I know that there was altitude, and I know there was layoffs and all that stuff that Cain dealt with, but Verdum fended off the best that Kane could dish out for the first round. And once he got into the second round, it became his fight.
You remember we were talking but before UFC 151, before it was canceled and all that, but Dan Henderson, there was this talk like, if Dan Henderson were to go in there and beat John Jones, could he be considered the greatest, martial artist of all time? Because that's how crazy the perception shifts from one thing to the next. It's crazy to me that Verdum has been able to sort of put himself quietly into a position where now he could be the best heavyweight we've ever known. That's an amazing shift. And you just look at, and it's sort of hard to dispute when you really look at his conquest, who he's beat. Given the circumstances and everything else, it's pretty amazing. He does have a couple of losses, but honestly, that Alistair Overeem one back in the Strikeforce Grand Prix when he was pleading with him to come to the ground, is so discounted because I feel like he wasn't trusting his hands. I think he was beating him on the feet. If he just stayed standing, that's probably not even a loss right now. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things.
Then he'd be on a 10-fight winning streak.
I know. And, I mean, to me, it's just amazing that a guy can sneak into the greatest heavyweight of all time discussion just like that.
It's one of the greatest comeback stories in MMA history, in my opinion, and we're June 18th right now. I think it's going to be impossible for Rafael Cordeiro to not be named Coach of the Year.
Yeah.
Dos Anjos is UFC lightweight champion. Verdum is UFC heavyweight champion. Beneil Dariush has quickly become a top contender. I mean, just look, and that's a team that's not very big, And I know some guys come and go, including Lyoto Machida, but wow, what he's done with those two guys in particular, nothing short of amazing.
It's like a rivalry's brewing between them and AKA.
I love it.
Yeah, they got some good guns going against each
Khabib,
other.
Dos Anjos, Verdum against Rockhold. I don't know. That seems to be the real rivalry. Let me ask you about Kane, Mark, because I'm wondering how people view him. People who cover the sport, fans who are really passionate about the sport. How do you view him after Saturday night? Because I don't want to take anything away from Verdum. I really think that it all came together for him. And then when you also consider the layoff for Kane, like if that fight was taking place in Vegas, in hindsight, I think Verdum probably wins just because, he just wanted it. But the fact that this is a guy who didn't come earlier to Mexico, clearly the altitude affected him. Clearly he didn't do everything he needed to do to put himself in a position to win that fight. Does that change your opinion on Kane as a fighter? Because we often say that, the battle is not what happens in the cage. I mean, that's part of the battle, but the whole road to get to that point. Sure. And he didn't do what he had to do to win that fight.
Well, I mean, maybe there are things that we don't know about that he couldn't get to Mexico in time, so who knows? And to me, I don't necessarily view him any differently at this point. Yes, he lost, okay. But I think he gets a little bit of a pass. At least he will get a little bit of a pass from people because of the layoff. It was 602 days, I think it was, in between fights, which is somewhat significant.
Yeah, 20 months. Crazy.
That's a bit of time.
Two Super Bowl champions came and went since that time.
Exactly. And then the UFC's lost 3 of their biggest stars in that time too.
That's true.
So I think you give him a little bit of a pass in that regard. Not a free pass, obviously, but you can look at it and say, and I think he gets away with that for a little while, at least until his next fight. You see what happens in his next fight, then you start to wonder, what's happened. I also think the wars with Dos Santos took a lot out of both of them, both of those fighters over there. I mean, the first fight obviously was a one-rounder, but the other two were just brutal beatdowns both ways.
Yeah,
and I think
those 50 minutes of action there.
Yeah, I mean, I get 602 days off, but maybe his energy levels weren't, at full bar.
They spar pretty hard at AKA too.
That too, yeah.
Maybe he didn't have 5 bars on his coverage at the time there, no matter how good he was feeling. So I think you give him a little bit of a pass because of the time off, and I also think that there is, maybe you look at this at some point 2 years from now, you say this was kind of the peak for him there.
I don't think I want to give him a pass. Well, okay, you go first.
Well, I just think from an insider standpoint, obviously, like you've talked to his coach many times, Javier. It's like you realize that he's like, Kane can be a little stubborn. He wants to do things his way and stuff.
Fight him to go 2 weeks.
So, and that's what I'm saying. Like maybe if anything comes out, maybe he's stubborn to the point of detriment to himself at times. And if the altitude really played a role, which obviously it did, but it obviously Verdum contributed to that by taking it out of him as well. You have to sort of look at that and say, you might have to, adjust your thinking a little bit. Because that smacks a little bit of the invincibility thing that some people start to reach at a little bit, like they hear a little bit too much of the hype, so that sort of thing. And I think maybe that might have played a role into this. So, from an insider standpoint, I think he needs to maybe not be as stubborn with his coach. Like he needs to maybe listen a little bit, and it'd be interesting to see kind of how he responds in his next fight.
Yeah, I'm in that camp. I wouldn't give him a pass because he has the resources as the heavyweight champion, or as the reigning champion at that time, had the resources to take his camp where it needed to go. And he chose not to. Of course, he just thought he was too good. He was going to smash this guy. But you look at that card, and everybody was gassing out. And I think this is something that the UFC is going to have to look at if and when they go back to Mexico City. Sure, the main event guys are probably going to have the resources to be able to go there for a month and train. But if you're the guy that's in the second prelim down the bottom of the card, and you're gonna, do you have the money to go down there with training partners and train in Mexico City for a month? Probably not. So I think I give a pass to just about everybody else on that card. Maybe not Melendez and Alvarez, because those guys also, I think, are established and probably could have done a little more training down there. But pretty much everybody else who was gassing out passed, every one of them.
Was it Tisha Torres? Somebody told you in one of their post-fight that they would come and spend a month down there. I forget who it was, though. But somebody had mentioned that exact same thing. Like, well, if I'm going to fight in Mexico City, I'm going to spend a month acclimating down there. I was like, wow, that's a very expensive.
Well, it's funny that he said that you said the second fight on the prelims, because Cathal Pendred was the second fight on the prelims, and he tweeted that after he arrived 6 weeks before the fight. That's a long period of time, right? Didn't have a great performance, won at the end of the day, but really did himself no favors. He tweeted that he broke even. After all the money he made, after having his training partners there.
And just to get criticized.
6 weeks, and he broke even. So it showed, I mean, this is expensive.
And so if you're, conversely, if you are the heavyweight champion, you've got the money and the resources and the focus is on you. And now I realize that, of course, the UFC, like anything, is going to focus on the headliners. That's what you do when if you go to a rock concert, who gets the good sound check? It's the headliner. The opening act, just has to make do with whatever the house sounds like, and that's pretty much what you got to live with. So the opening acts of a UFC card, they've got to deal with the hand that's dealt to them. But if you're the headliner, you've got to damn well get down there and take care of business in advance of the fight card.
And by the way, speaking of the heavyweight division, Josh Barnett returning in September as well. So I'm not ready to count him out quite yet as well. One last thing on Mexico, a little bit related to Mexico. How about Gilbert Melendez versus Al Iaquinta? Just announced Gilbert returning a month later, essentially. Yeah, he just
32-day difference, I think it was.
You've heard of that Iaquinta guy? You know who he is?
Yeah, don't boo him.
Don't boo him.
Don't
Are you surprised
don't
Melendez?
Speak adversely about him.
Are you surprised Melendez is returning this quickly and against someone like Iaquinta, a dangerous fighter, but not the caliber of fighter he's been fighting in the UFC as far as rankings
I was
concerned?
somewhat surprised to see that he did take that fight.
Yeah.
Melendez, I mean, of course, Iaquinta's like, yeah, let's do it.
This is gravy.
He just wants to keep fighting, and certainly you get the number 5 guy with a big name. The name, I think, is far better than the ranking in that scenario. It is a little bit surprising for me to see Gilbert take that on the 32 days turnaround. Maybe he's feeling great after that fight, though.
Yeah, he's rubbing it in. He's rubbing it in the judge's face like, look, I'm out of here in mint condition. I'm going to take another fight.
The other guy's got a broken nose, broken orbital.
Exactly.
He could also see it as a quick way to, maybe Gilbert's thinking this is a quick way to get back into the mix again, in the mix as the phrase is, into that title contention. And you can see he's Iaquinta, he's a tough guy, he's ranked 13 or wherever he is at it. Oh, I could beat him and then be right back into the title picture or, the number 1 contender fight right away. So maybe that's part of his thinking.
Yeah, I was surprised that he took it because of the short notice, because Iaquinta seems to be like one of those dangerous opponents who, you don't get maybe the credit for beating. He's on a roll as of late. Gilbert said something to me that I hope he doesn't mind that I share, because it was after the fight in the hotel. But it was such a sincere comment that I've never really heard a fighter say to me. He's like, Ariel, I've been, and he was disappointed. He was bummed that he lost that fight. I think his team, including Nate Diaz, thought he won the fight.
It was a great interview that came out. I don't know if you saw it.
He said, Ariel, I've been fighting for 10 years, and I've been fighting the toughest guys, and sometimes I didn't get the recognition because it was in Japan, it was in Strikeforce, whatever. And for the first time in my career, I don't think I'm going to be a top 10 fighter anymore. I've now lost the last 2, and I think I'm going to fall out of the top 10. And I was like, that's crazy. You are 100% a top 10 fighter. I wasn't trying to make him feel better. That's my opinion. He said, well, I'm 4 right now. I'll probably fall out of the top 10. I think he was giving a little too much credit to the people who vote on the UFC rankings.
Nameless
he ended up being, I think he's 5 now, as you said.
I think that's what I saw.
So, he has nothing to worry about. But it was such a sincere human moment from a guy who's been really pouring so much. And I think that's why he probably accepted this fight. Get back on track. track, erase the bad memory of Mexico City.
Yeah, when you're suffering a loss, there is a very human inclination to do something about it. You can go cower in a shell, or you can say, well, I'm just going to get out there and turn this around. Didn't, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Ben Henderson did the same thing after his loss to Cowboy Cerrone, which was a similar fight in which it could have gone either way, and he really believed that he had won it, so he just turned it right around and sort of tried to erase that from his memory. I think maybe that's what Gilbert's thinking.
Let's talk quickly about Jose Aldo, Conor McGregor. It is rapidly approaching UFC 189. Can't wait. Some drama last week where Jose Aldo was approached to take a random drug test by a sample collector that was commissioned by the Nevada Athletic Commission. He apparently takes the test, the urine test, and then they asked this individual for his paperwork, for his visa, for all this stuff, documentation, and the Brazilian Athletic Commission, which in my opinion doesn't have the best reputation, gets involved and says, well, we know nothing about this guy, which, by the way, why should they if he's coming from Nevada? But that's a different story for a different day. And at the end of the story, they discard his urine sample. Now, he takes a test 24 hours later, but that's not a random test anymore. A lot can happen in 24 hours. His coach and Jose Aldo have talked about this week. They held a press conference, all this stuff. What do you make of this? I mean, does this fight now have a black cloud hanging over it, or do you give him a pass on this one?
I'm not sure about a pass, but I think that Aldo is protecting his interests, and now that we have these much more stringent regulations regarding PEDs, and you face a potential ban of 2 years or more, I think it's incumbent upon fighters to be sure that everybody is taking a sample from you is legitimate and has all their, has dot all the I's and cross all the T's in their business. So I don't think it's a bad thing that they were making sure this guy was. From what I read, there was some issue with his work visa for Brazil. Now, it's of course a bad PR move for Aldo and company.
Why not say this? Why not say, okay, this guy is clearly from Nevada but doesn't have the right documentation. That being said, I will pee anywhere, anytime, in any cup. I will prove to the world, and then I'll deal with that afterwards. But for now, take your little sample and do what you want with it.
Well, this is true. That's the better PR move. But this is like any time you're stopped by the police and the police start asking you questions, and you voluntarily, if they say, oh, can I search your car or can I search your house, and you voluntarily give up that right, and if you say no, you can't, well, some people say, well, if you didn't have something to hide, you'd let people to search. It's there's civil liberties and protecting ourselves. The rules and regulations that are set out are there for a reason. So I have no problem with Aldo and company doing their due diligence to see whether this person is legitimate and the person did not have the proper paperwork. The Nevada Commission should make sure that the guys who are going down there to represent them are, have all the stuff that they've got to do. I think you're a champion. What if the guy, takes some sample and he wasn't, legitimate, and now Aldo gets banned for 2 years because of some test that was done wrong. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and fighters now, because they face bigger penalties, I think they do have to be a little more vigilant.
What do you think? You seem to agree.
I think Jeff makes a
make a good point. Yes.
Makes a very strong point, and he backed it up well.
Rare. It's a rare thing.
A lot of nice bullet points.
Once you maybe come back to reality earlier, suddenly
I mean, it doesn't look good, especially in all sports. And nowadays, you automatically assume someone's doing something. Just if they won a game, if a pitcher throws a strike, he's probably on something. If a running back gets a first down, you assume he's doing something. And I think you're in a lot of that same scenario, especially with fighting. Everyone in the combat sports in general, they always assume that you're on PEDs because, you stem from the pro wrestling world where everybody in the days were, and now it's kind of, obviously it's different now, but you're automatically predetermined, to think that someone's on something. And if someone walks in here right now and says it's not, we need to be drug tested, and they don't have paperwork or anything, if they have something wrong with it, I mean, look at Ryan Braun. He won he lied, but he won his whole defense on the fact that there was improper paperwork and improper chain of custody or something like that. everything's got to be in order, right? You know, it can easily. That's why you have your A sample and your B sample. If some guy is not, and I'm sure he was legit, right? You proved that he was, the Nevada guy, right?
Eventually.
If you're not legit at the first shot, then everything stems from that. How do you prove that the test is going to be legit? How do you prove he collected the samples correctly? How do you show that it wasn't tampered with or something like that? You know, if everything's not on the up and up, then, to me, it's kind of like, well, let's.
You're out.
You're out. Exactly.
Well, to me, it's the bummer is that it's like the dog chasing its own tail. It's just the fact that there's technicalities. There's going to be these types of things that are going to happen, and we're still going to have to iron out these sort of kinks as they happen. But I'm with you. I feel like the reason if there's a black cloud at all, if Conor McGregor doesn't latch onto it and just blow it up into something really huge, I think that it's, that there is suspicion now. We're right in this age where we just went through this whole process where they held this big summit where they're talking about all the drug testing that's coming up with all the big guys up on the stage and everything that they're going to be doing, and then this sort of thing happens. It does lend an air of suspicion to it, and that's not what you want to do. So in some ways, you'd like the PR to be a little better, where you're maybe Aldo. I don't know. Aldo has the right, like you mentioned, for all those reasons. Like Aldo has the right. Everybody has the right to be like, hey, is this legitimate? What is this all about? But you would like the PR side of that. You'd like them to think that. You'd like Aldo to be. You'd like to view Aldo as a guy that's like, hey man, go ahead and do it. There's nothing. You're not going to find anything in it. That's what you want. And I guess there's just enough obfuscation in there to make it, suspect.
I guess one more thing to discuss and dissect and talk about, especially as far as Conor is concerned. He's going to bring this up closer to the fight leading up to July 11th. Okay, finally, before we go, we have to talk about Saturday. That's the next UFC fight. This time it's in Berlin, and there's a title fight headlining it. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the new UFC strawweight champion, who in my opinion has become one of the breakout stars of 2015. A real great personality. She's a fun fighter to watch. Great stare downs, as she's done once again this week in Berlin. She's fighting Jessica Penne. It's a typical European card, but the big story, of course, is that a title fight is headlining a Fight Pass show. Now, Fight Pass hasn't been around for a decade. We know that. It's essentially, a year and a half old, but we haven't gotten this kind of big title fight on fight. We've got big fights. We've got Alexander Gustafsson, other big names, but a title fight has never been put on Fight Pass. And now when you talk about the strawweight title, a new division, what do you make of this? Does this feel like they're devaluing the title? Do you like this? Does it make sense that a European champion is fighting in Europe, so you say, okay, I get it? How do you feel about a title fight being on an internet platform?
Well, I mean, I would like to know what was going on in Joe Silva's office when they were planning this out. I suspect that if they wanted to put this in a different form, they would need to match it with another title fight. I don't think this would be one. It certainly wouldn't build a pay-per-view around this as the headliner. But so if there were an opportunity to build it into a card with another title fight, maybe that's the way you go. But I don't have a big issue with it. I think that we had this similar discussion when Gustafsson was scheduled to headline a Fight Pass. That was right toward the beginning of Fight Pass, and they were clearly trying to build up a subscriber base. And we don't really know how that it's ebbed and flowed. Whether the subscriber base has slowed down and people aren't really joining. And now here's an opportunity to throw my $10 a month in there, and I get to see a title fight. So I don't have an issue with it. I think she's a great fighter to watch, and it might entice some people to join on.
What do you think?
I'm in agreement on that point, and I think it's another avenue for someone to market themselves as a fighter. To become, come check me out on Fight Pass. I mean, otherwise you'd probably have that card on FS1 or Fox, somewhere on the Fox network, which also has the Women's World Cup going on right now. So maybe there's some sort of scheduling conflict. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been in those meetings, so I don't know. But I'm fine with that. Put it on Fight Pass, build up that platform, and give yourself a chance to market JJ, whose name I'm not even going to attempt.
Joanna Champion, she called herself.
Yeah. Joanna Champion.
So I'm going to go with JJ.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with the strawweight champ. Put them on Fight Pass. It's another great avenue for someone to market themselves on. And you look at what they're doing now. They've got Invicta on there. They've added Titan FC fighting. Put as much stuff on there. I mean, if they're adding it, they're doing it for a reason. And I'm sure it's to keep their current subscribers happy as well as get a whole new bunch. So
I feel like this was strictly circumstantial because I believe, yeah, there's a little bit of a devaluing going on, but I think that happens when you have enough belts. There's just so many belts now in play in the UFC that you're going to start to actually prioritize which ones means something more than that. This is being the newest one. Would it have been the same if it wasn't a European fighter who just won a fight on a pay-per-view like Jędrzejczyk versus, let's say that Rose Namajunas had won the belt and then defended it? There's no way that this fight would be, it's not going to be there. I think it's circumstantial. They just looked at, they like, you know what, we have a Polish champion, this fight's in Germany, we can get, we can put it on Fight Pass, we can sell Fight Pass. I think it was just a lot of elements that came into it. So ultimately, I see why the UFC would do it, and, you can't help but not like it because, that card otherwise, I don't know if you guys have really looked through the card, there's not a lot of big intrigue on it, and from my mind, but that fight alone has some intrigue because Jędrzejczyk right now, we saw her, we've seen her in two different kinds of fights. One where she dominated Esparza and, looking very good, and one where she might have lost to Gadelha. So you're like, well, I don't know where she's at. So in some ways, it's like a process of unveiling the whole division, really. But for her particularly, and Jessica Penne is a good opponent. So I feel like it's a strong fight that goes on a card that's just okay, and then so it makes sense for a Fight Pass, given the circumstances.
And what if they had flipped things around? What if they had made this title fight the co-main of last weekend's fight, right underneath the Velasquez-Verdum fight? So now they have two title fights there, and then they take that co-main and make it the headliner here. Well, you'd have a real action-packed fight to bring to Berlin, but there's not as much. I think they like to have that European, some European flavor to the European cards. So it's a trade-off no matter how you do it. So I guess it's, when you can say, well, we're putting, come subscribe to Fight Pass because we're going to give you title fights. And sure, it's going to be the strawweight division. It's probably the least glamorous division in the entire organization. But still, it's a title fight. It's one more thing they can advertise when they want to sell the Fight Pass.
Make no mistake about it. Just because I asked you that question doesn't mean I disagree with it. I think it's a brilliant move. I think they made lemonade out of lemons here. Because the original main event, let's not forget, was Glover Teixeira versus Alexander Gustafsson. Gustafsson gets injured. I think this fight actually makes a little more sense for that market, considering that Jędrzejczyk is Polish and a European champion. And also, I feel like putting the fight on Fight Pass to say title fight on Fight Pass gets people, oh, this is something. This is a good way to mark. Everything about it makes sense to me. And obviously, to swap Melendez-Alvarez would make no sense because Melendez-Alvarez needed to be in Mexico City given Melendez's background. This makes the card that much more intriguing, in my opinion. Sure. And I don't think it devalues the title. I just think it's perfect. I think this is the way Fight Pass should be used. Yeah, sure. And hey, why not give all the attention to the strawweights?
Is able to sort of look as good as she sort of did in this last fight too. I feel like you're going to be able to sell her a little more as you go forward because let's face it, like her striking and everything about her, like just even that Iggy Pop movement, like she's very all sinews and force, like coils and stuff. To me, she's very unique to watch from all three of her UFC fights. So if she's able to do that and really put away Jessica Penne, I feel like we won't even have this discussion again. But for the time being, I feel like it does make a lot of sense.
People might nitpick this thing, but I think this is the way they should use Fight Pass. And also, having the strawweights as the main event, I think means a lot. And I think that's the kind of thing they need to do.
Lemonade from lemons, right? That's what you say. Would you also need Sugar Rashad Evans in order to really make lemonade out of
Sometimes you could have sugar-free lemonade.
Oh, okay.
So he's back to non-reality. Right. Here we go.
All right. On that note, we say goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We are back next week for another live episode of the MMA Beat. It's another busy weekend in MMA, of course, as we talked about earlier. Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock, the fight that was supposed to happen 7 years ago, finally, hopefully, at least for Bellator, will happen Friday night in St. Louis, and then the UFC is back in Berlin, Germany, Saturday afternoon on UFC Fight Pass. We'll talk about all that and a whole lot more, plus, hopefully, the big UFC debut in MSG. Can you make it happen for us? You're on the scene over there.
I'll make a call.
Make it happen.
51-49?
Let me make a call for you.
Have a great weekend, everyone. I'm Mario. That is Jeff. That is Mark. That is Chuck. Lucas somewhere in St. Louis just soaking it all in. Soaking everything that Kimbo and Shamrock have to offer.
Seth Petruzzelli's in St. Louis too, just in case.
Oh my. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the fights.